This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Blake. Welcome, Dr. Blake. Now, among your many accolades, I believe you're the new president of Macon State. Did I get the name right on that?
No, you got it wrong, Dr. Robinson.
Oh,
it's a pleasure to be here too.
Well, good. What is the name now?
It's Middle Georgia State College.
Why don't you tell us what's happened? I mean, it's a huge institution. That's a big deal.
It is.
Why did I think it was called Macon State? They used the old name.
Because here in Macon, there's been a wonderful former institution, Macon State. It's been around and made a big difference.
Yes.
But 2 years ago, the Board of Regents unified what was Macon State College with Middle Georgia College, which has 3 campuses east of here, centered in Cochrane. And we became one institution, Middle Georgia State College, with the goal of moving forward and growing and developing our sense of identity to become a university, a state university.
Well, good for you. And it's a big place, isn't it? How many students do you have altogether?
Well, it is. We have 8,000 students across the region, and the main 2 campuses are in Macon and in Cochrane.
Yes.
But we're serving students at the traditional age and the non-traditional, and we hope soon in graduate students as well.
Now, listening to your accent, it sounds like you come from someplace north of the Mason-Dixon line. Is that a fair statement?
A little bit north and a long way east,
a long way east
across
here.
the pond, as they say, from London, England.
Oh, really?
Originally.
Wow.
Yeah. I came out to the States 20 years ago. And despite having traveled around, still sound like this.
Yes.
And go back to, I have my father and brother and sister live in England, so I like to visit with them.
Well, good. And so, these small speech impediments, I think we're pretty accepting of that.
They think I sound American these days.
I'm sure that could be a black mark against you.
No.
Well, let's see. Now, you were discussing some of your journey through life here.
Right.
I think you arrived at Oxford after some adventures.
I did. I grew up as a child in the suburbs of London.
Yes.
Didn't that time when I was 11, they took children and they put 15% of them into what was called the grammar schools, and the rest of us went to secondary modern technical schools. And I failed the exam that would put me in grammar school. Went and spent 4 years in the technical school, and then they said to my father, who kept pointing out, I think he's in the wrong school. They said, yes, you're right, he's in the wrong school. So they moved me to the grammar school, and I then went on and found myself able to apply and get into Oxford.
No, that's complicated. I think, and what I'd like to talk about a little bit is the way that, in at least many places, people are pigeonholed by test taking.
Absolutely.
And so, a person could have all kinds of virtues and talents, and the tests can be arbitrary and capricious, can they not?
Well, it can, absolutely. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, pointed out the examination is an educational examination is one of the most classifying and demarking forms of, in his view, oppression there can be. Certainly, we can categorize and label people, and they can live with those labels for the rest of their lives. But there's one of the great things, I think, about educational development in the 20th century and now in the 21st, particularly in the United States, is the idea of accessibility and helping individuals find their own innate potential and having systems that allow that. So I think that the United States has been very, very good at having a system that stretches across the population and allows people at different opportunities. You still need exams to monitor progress and see how people are developing, but the old sort of like Dickensian view of having an examination that will terrorize you, I hope we're moving a little bit beyond that. At this time of finals, I'm not sure we are.
Well,
everyone's feeling stressed out.
There's a little stress out there.
Yeah.
Well, society is an important mission. Education is to sort of make society a just and a fair place, and so open access is a good thing.
Yeah.
And at your institution here, I think it's a pretty open access place, is it not? You want to embrace talents of all types.
We do. We do, and I think it's to be fair to the system, the university system of Georgia. It's got very much this mission of
Yes.
serving the public, of recognizing
yes.
that people at different stages in their lives.
Yes.
I mean, at the age of 11, I was clearly told I wasn't capable of going
Yes.
on and having
Yes.
certain
Right. Yes.
experiences,
Yes.
but later on in life, I apparently was.
Yes.
So we need to have a system that reflects that,
Yes.
that gives that accessibility to people and gives them the optimism of education.
Yes.
And America's done that very well. I mean, it is a moral, that's a sort of sense of what a democracy, a modern democracy needs to recognize, is that we talk about skill shortages
yes.
and we talk about changing knowledge, but
Yes.
the reality is the human mind is capable of addressing those. We just need to have systems that allow that mind to flourish.
Yeah, yes, indeed, and I think the state education system is efforts are underway to do that, and it sounds like locally getting university status will be a big deal. What will be the advantages of having university status, do you think, for your institution?
Well, it would serve populations more broadly and move on into the graduate field, so
Yes.
advanced degrees as well.
Yes.
Because we're living in an age in which if you're going to be a lead nurse or
Yes.
a principal
Right.
of an elementary school
Yes,
or a
yes.
successful business
Yes,
professional,
yes.
the reality is that leadership skills and knowledge at an advanced level
Yes.
is going to be part of that evolving career opportunity.
yes.
The idea that you could start as an apprentice in a trade
yes.
and work your way up to running a
Yes,
hospital,
right, yes,
those
yes,
days don't
yes,
exist
yes,
anymore.
yes.
Instead, we need to have the skills, I think, of transferability, so that
Yes.
people will know the different ways in which they can apply their learning. And we need to have opportunities of continuing learning through careers and professions.
Yes.
You don't just get a job and stay forevermore in that job, you continue growing. A university does that, and a university also brings a strong sense of research and scholarship, and that we're not just transmitting knowledge, but we're in the business of generating knowledge.
Cool.
So as a state university, that's the road that we're going toward.
Well, you've persuaded me. That sounds like a good idea to do that. I've been persuaded. Now, in your, you've obviously had a pretty interesting career. What did you, as they say, read at Oxford? I mean, it's sort of a...
That's you've been there. That's exactly what I say. You don't study, you
yes,
read.
Yes.
I don't know if many people read these days,
Yes,
but I studied or read theology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my undergraduate degree was in theology. In my master's degree, I did a study of religion and politics, and then I went back to London after being a high school teacher. I was a junior researcher and lecturer at a university in the west of London, and I enrolled in a PhD at the University of London and went on and did my PhD there. So Oxford and London are my two, kind of intellectual homes that I enjoy reading what's going on there and staying in touch.
Well, that's a good thing. So theology is that's interesting. Kind of a background, I would say. We were discussing morality a little bit in the United States, different morality and the importance of that. And I think you'd strayed into political world and morality. Do you have any comments about that? I mean, morality and religion and politics.
Well, I think as a college president, theology has been useful because I think you have to understand a college as a system, and with 5 campuses, ours is certainly a system. I mean, I think that way of thinking has been helpful. But the other piece that strikes me is that education is a very core moral activity. It's not just about training or, as I said, about transmitting knowledge.
Yes.
It's about developing people and the communities in which they work. And that is in itself, with a small p, that's political.
Yes.
As the Greeks would have said.
Yes,
That's
yes.
exactly what the city republic is all about, the city state.
Yes.
So we're engaged in, making sure that people can get jobs and build careers, but we're also engaged in their sense of self and their contribution to their communities and to society. And that's a moral activity. I'm very happy to put it in those terms. Other people might prefer to focus on other elements of how education functions, but I see it at its core as a moral activity.
Well, we could talk about that. I mean, we had a little earlier conversation. We sort of chanced upon some of the importance of morality in the American identity, and I think, the Puritans, City on the Hill, which I think is a biblical reference. Am I right on that? I think that's City on the Hill is somewhere in the Bible.
Probably.
But I think so. But so there's a very strong religious imprint on the country, and maybe from a European viewpoint, occasionally Europeans are a little surprised at the standards we sometimes, the operative word is sometimes, sometimes hold our politicians to a standard that Europeans chuckle about sometimes.
That's
I mean,
right.
Any comments on that?
Well, certainly, I think very much the United States the people of the United States practice faith very, very consistently. There was once a study by the UN that said that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United
Yes.
States of America were the two most devout nations in terms of regular religious practice. So there is a real, which is a
Yes, right, yes.
fascinating connection
Yes,
with
yes,
two very
yes,
different
yes.
cultures there. But the US has a very profound sense of its the religious identity of its people, but at the same time, a clear sense of how does that play into the public arena and how does it not play into the public arena. So there's that debate. Where I came from in the United Kingdom, I mean, there's actually an official religion. Anglicanism, or the Church of England,
Yes.
is the official religion, and yet at the same time, there's a sort of lack of presence of the language of faith.
Yes.
Say, if you and I listen to the House of Commons,
Yes.
Which they do broadcast on TV
Yeah,
on
that's
a
it's
Sunday,
very
Sunday
amusing,
evening,
too.
Prime
Amusing it
Minister's,
is. Amusing it is,
amusing.
yes.
Prime Minister's question
Yes.
time. You know, the back and forth, you're not going to hear much language of faith, whereas
Yes.
I think in the United States you hear it more strongly. And I think that I'm blessed enough to be both a United States citizen and a UK citizen. So I actually feel I get the best of both
Oh.
worlds in a way. I'm very lucky. In
Well,
that
good for you. Good for you. I mean, so you get a sense of the cultural differences the similarities and cultural
Right.
differences. One thing that might be remarked upon is, at least in the U.S., there is not a state religion, unlike many of the European nations, including the UK.
Right.
And in some ways, maybe that causes things to be a little more robust. If you have a state religion, it's contaminated a little bit by being too close to political power. I mean, do you have any thoughts of that? I mean, here at least we'd like to imagine that our religious institutions check the excesses of the government. They're independent. They're on the lookout for knavery.
Well,
And maybe they're a little too close. In the House of Lords, the bishops are actually in the House of Lords.
They are.
Isn't that a little contaminating? I'll throw that out.
well, I don't know if contaminating is a word. What it recognises is that the language of faith inevitably has an impact on the culture in which that faith is being adhered to. That you're going to have debate and discourse about how does my faith impact the people around me and how I relate to them. And I think one of the great things, I mean, if we looked at say the UK and the United States, we can say that they have many problems, but they have been thriving. Let's talk about the season. We're in the holiday season.
Yes.
They're beacons on the hill. They're lights. They're lights
Yes,
in the
right,
darkness.
right.
But they're democratic institutions in those countries that have stood the test of time.
Yes.
And yet they've had slightly different ways in which religion is featured, and yet the core sense of the core values of the United States are still ones that are respected around the world, that people are trying to model.
Yes.
And while we go on struggling with different social and moral
Yes.
issues, the core basis of the Constitution and the sense of freedom is one that's deeply respected. In Britain, where we have had an official religion,
Yes.
it is now, I think, very respectful about not interfering, directly. Britain
Yes.
is a democracy, not a theocracy.
Yes.
And both Britain and the United States are faced with the reality that we live in a global village
Yes.
in which both countries have religious diversity. Last night I was in TJ Maxx. I'm not sure if I'm meant to mention a commercial outlet, but I was
So
at
anyway, you have my permission.
to
It's okay.
TJ Maxx, and I saw signs saying, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Feliz Navidad, and I
Yes.
thought all that's missing is Buddhism and Hinduism.
Yes, yes.
They were trying to recognize that
Yes.
we live in a religiously diverse world.
Yes, yes.
And that world is on our doorstep as well as around the other side of the planet.
Yes,
and we
yes.
need an informed world where I think that religious tolerance and understanding is cherished and celebrated.
Well, that's true enough. But maybe we can bounce the basketball from the point of view of history, maybe this is your sort of field of inquiry in many ways. But the idea is that the UK was, and you could call it kind of say the 8th century or whatever, maybe something like a theocracy. The idea that the church and the king were united in a way, and that's been
Right.
sort of the sense of state and religious control was pretty firmly imprinted there. But along with that, if I could say it, was the idea of that everyone had their own soul. There was something that was independent of, I guess, the power of secular power.
Right.
And along with that, the idea that education sort of was born out of this situation, out of this theological situation. So, obviously you're at the mother of universities, Oxford, but those colleges there arose out of religious concern and issues. And not to put too fine a point on it, but I'm sort of throwing out a certain defense of the Christian viewpoint in the world. It's true enough we have a diverse world out there, but there's a certain kind of importance to traditional Judeo-Christian viewpoint. I would say that, and the values that are intrinsic in that. So if you discussed how modern democracy has arisen, I think it went through through a Christian religious, chamber. And then you could contrast that maybe with the viewpoints that other great world religions have, and how easily those two mesh.
I think you're absolutely right. If you look at common law, think of Western common law.
Yes.
I mean, that comes out of a Judeo-Christian tradition, undoubtedly, yes. and is nearly 1,000 years old, emerging in Britain at the time, and is shaped.
Yes.
But interestingly, at the same time, the Enlightenment, once the Enlightenment
Yes.
begins and disciplines begin to use their own language and forms of expression, that
Yes.
the world is no longer understood solely in terms of heaven
Right.
and then the earth and
Yes.
down below the waters and hell. We
Yes.
start to have science, and we start
Right,
to have
yes.
cosmology and astronomy. You get what you see in Western society, which is the sense of independence of thinking and mind and reason, and I would hope a sense in which mind and reason is in harmony, can be in harmony with belief and faith, that neither of those can replace each other, that they actually work hand in hand. And I think that's where the Western democracies and the Judeo-Christian tradition has brilliantly done that for centuries.
Well, just to talk about it, I think we're onto an important philosophical issue here. The idea that the Western system has produced something, and now it's because of the extraordinary improvement in transportation, communication, the diversity of the world, people, and also the many people from many places are coming together, particularly in America, and you mentioned the place you've been, so lots of different viewpoints are coming. But I wonder about sort of the tectonic plate movement in the world, and I'll speak about Islam a little bit. So we have these two enormous religions. You could say they might have actually be part of the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
you could say that.
Yeah.
But I think, isn't it, you mentioned Iran and the U.S. and that the word theocracy was tossed about. Actually, in Iran, you could call it a theocracy.
Absolutely.
And you could say...
I think many would, and many would be proud to. And I'm glad we're not in a theocracy.
But you could say that in some ways, the Islamic journey through the world, with all their good points to it, it hasn't matched the sort of the Western European American journey. It's been a sort of slightly different journey.
Sure.
And that a theocracy would be something a little more understandable. I mean, people that read the Quran, so you want to put the world in harmony with the Quran, and that would be the major mission of a secular ruler. And the Islamic State, isn't this what's going on right now? I mean, these great tectonic plates brushing against each other.
Well, I think my read on it is, and certainly Islam is going through a stage of development where those forces are clashing. But I look at this as the problem of totalitarianism. I mean, actually, you can even find through all of history in different world religions periods in which people would want to have an absolute, total, simple answer to all of the world that they knew and that they could imagine.
Yes.
And I think one of the great strengths of democracy
Yes.
is that it has resisted that and has managed to find, when I said faith and reason working in harmony, the reason part of that prevents us from going our worst impulses. I
Yes.
think that faith is something
Yes.
deeply to be cherished, but it can also become demonic and totalizing and ideology, pure
Yes.
ideology.
Yes.
At that point, we live in a world that doesn't tolerate differences. And part of the beauty of the United States, a pluribus unum,
Yes.
is the idea of out of many one, that you can still have one confident, growing, exploring place where values are cherished and yet still have many. still have the sense in which diversity feeds into it. You see in other countries, let's take North Korea, that was on the news today. North Korea is a country where that is not permitted.
Yes.
And that can go on in the most secular, Marxist, communist, atheistic country, and actually, ironically, in some of the most religious, in my opinion.
Yes. Well, you're well said on those comments. Some people have chosen to divide history into the age of faith, the age of reason. I mean, that's the way tomes are written, and so the putting together in the 21st century, keeping those two enormous impulses in balance with one another, and actually complementary toward one another, is something that's certainly possible, and it's accomplished. But as you through your journey in life, you've seen a lot of different things. But one of the things that really does confront the world is the idea that in some places, religion is assuming enormous cultural imperative, and maybe, if I could say this, maybe less so in Western Europe, more so in the U.S., but then extremely so in the Islamic world. Now, is that going to be a destructive thing? I mean, from your background, is that can it be destructive? I mean, are we going to have a huge nuclear holocaust or some 9/11 repeated itself?
I don't have the crystal ball, and I hope not. I hope that human sense and the grace of God prevent that. What I would say is you're right in saying that Western Europe has been a culture for at least the last 50 years that has become increasingly secular and non-practicing of religion. Interesting. So that when I was a theology student, sociologists were predicting the demise of religious activity.
Yes.
Now, of course, like much academia, it's a bit of a fad in a time, and then you discover another generation has come back. There's not only a very powerful sense of religious life here in the States, there's actually a resurgence of religious life in Britain at the moment, coming not from extreme religion, but coming from the Church of England. There's a sense in which young people are wanting to find some, I think, deeper exploration of the questions of life than that just Facebook or tweeting are giving them. So I'm hopeful. I would encourage that.
Yes.
That would be something that would be welcome in my country.
Yes. Well, I mean, we're actually quite close cousins about all these issues. It is interesting the way that religion plays itself out in each place. I mentioned earlier the House of Lords. I understand it's going an enormous revision. So it's not in the same place it used to be. But isn't it true enough that the Church of England bishops have a place there? It would be like the local ministers from around the United States would be in the U.S. Senate. That seems a little. Comments on that? I mean, do they do a good job? What's going on?
If you were inventing a democratic system, you'd never invent a House of Lords, which is all the more puzzling why it works so remarkably well.
Yes.
It was the Bob Dole, Senator Bob Dole, that said that the House of Lords is similar to the United States Senate. It's
he said that. Was that a
joke? Wise and thoughtful, and I'm not sure any of us think of our leaders on that side of the pond or here as sometimes wise. But no, the House of Lords, well, it had a component that was hereditary until Tony Blair had that abolished. So for 1,000 years, my son could, if I was a lord, could sit in the House of Lords. That's been abolished. That was abolished 15 years ago. But the fascinating thing is, whereas the United States is separated with checks and balance, the executive office and the presidency, Congress and the Supreme Court, Parliament does it all together. It's all combined, and the really powerful is not lobby or chamber, is not the House of Lords, it's the House of Commons, which chosen just like the House of Representatives here. But the Prime Minister, who is the leader of the biggest party, is your chief executive and your representative and leading the government, all rolled into one. And that's, I think, very, very... A lot of American politicians have pointed out that the Prime Minister actually has more power than the US President has, or the Speaker of the House here in the States. So it's a way in which democracy is developed in a different way, and of course without a written constitution either. There's no written constitution.
Maybe you've chanced upon a subject of import. I mean, in the U.S. we have, I guess, sort of a messianic mission. We could say we want to make the world better, and I think traditionally we maybe we still do. We send missionaries, Christian missionaries to different places. But one of our missionary, I guess, impulses is to have the world as a democratic place. You would say maybe in the 1850s, the idea was we're going to send Baptist missionaries to China, if I could say that, and they still do. But that was a huge impulse here to do that. And the assumption was, well, our system is so great, we can make sure everyone has it. And then, in a way, when a country seems to be a not democratic country, we believe that country is an error, and we say, well, the reason the country is an error is there's some malfactor of, power is there, and it would be our mission to remove that person or those bad guys. And yet, we see a very successful democracy. It is not quite like ours. I mean, it seems to function quite well. I mean, everybody's, I think, pretty content with it, and they think that justice is occurring in fits and starts in the UK, just like everywhere. But they're the one model for government and human activities. I mean, can we limit it to democratic states? Is it possible to have a theological state that could be a good thing? Or what exactly is the problem with a place like North Korea? If we really want to
I think
articulate
there's lots of places, lots of problems with North Korea, but what we should recognize that whenever we bring that judgment to look at the world, and I think judgments are essential.
Right,
I think we are meant to be, back to faith and reason, we are given a mind to make judgments and evaluate, evaluate what is preferable, what is a better state, what is more dignified, what is more ascribing of your humanity rather than denouncing your humanity. So I think democracy has been a wonderful, appropriate way in which those values have thrived. The danger is if we try and circumscribe and say there is only one form of democracy. It only works in one way. It's my way, or maybe it's your way, but that misses the point of human complexity. And I think as human beings, this is where education becomes such an important tool. We need to have in our lives a sense of both security and stability, and yet also freedom and exploration. We need it in our personal lives, we need it in the communities and the families and we need it in our societies. Now, I happen to believe that both faith and reason are essential to safeguard those, and that democracy is a system which actually originates in pagan Greeks, not Christians of the Middle Ages. It's, you go back to the pre-Christian Greek concept of democracy, and it's there in a pre-Christian era. What I would say is, though, democracy is understood, that core sense of respecting you and your voice, you respecting mine, us having that security and yet the freedom to be who we are. And I think that the UK and the United States stand as, back to the beacon idea, beacons of how societies have managed to maintain that over a long time. It's just fascinating that in the United States there's a written constitution that defines how that should work, and Britain for centuries has got by kind of not putting it down in writing, just arguing about it in Parliament, and then producing the laws to try and regulate whatever they come up with.
Well, on that note, I think our time has to be concluded tonight, but I'm going to puzzle over what you said, which seem to be very important comments that have come out. So I thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Dr. Blake, for being with us. We'll have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.